No, you eat Reese's Pieces like Freddy eats M&M's.
There is a lot more in this box than I would have expected. There's a lot in there.
Dad, we're not supposed to talk with our mouth full.
Oh, right. Duly noted. Hey, you got any more of these? What do you call them? Pieces of Reese's Pieces?
Well, yeah, but don't eat them all. I like those too, and I did all the work.
Yeah, taking credit for everything. You know, you were just like him.
Just like who?
Never mind. Do you think maybe tomorrow, when we go trick-or-treating again, you could dress up as somebody a little bit less creepy, you know, like Marlon Brando or Gumby or like, I don't know, Godzilla?
Wait, we're trick-or-treating again tomorrow?
Well, yeah, it's Halloween season, right?
Why haven't we ever trick-or-treated 2 days in a row before? We can't be trick-or-treating.
Yeah, well, yeah, we can, because it's a special year. It's like, you know, it's Halloween leap year. That's what it is. Look, we're just doing things a little bit different this time. Dear cheesy, washed-out game show host, a couple weeks into Spawn year, I was really surprised and elated to get a break from the daily McFarlane grind and read a couple of specials, crossing our favorite angsty, ambivalent roadkill face with my favorite angsty-driven caped-and-cowl superhero, Batman. Only one of those one-shots was remotely worth my time. It was the one McFarlane wasn't involved with, but it was a nice change of pace, and it reminded me that brutish, dark vigilantes who spend their nights scouring roofs and alleys don't have to be as boring as sheetrock. I just read a 4-issue miniseries that brought me right back to that graveyard. After a few pages of Sword of Azrael, a wave of deja vu hit me like a batarang to the face. Just 2 hours in, and I feel like I'm reviewing Spawn again. It felt like, once again, those worlds were meeting, except it wasn't Spawn and Batman's worlds colliding, it was Batman doing Spawn. And doing it well. It's compelling and coherent and deliberately paced, and it doesn't take itself too seriously. But there is a lot of comic book absurdity and excuses for ultra-dramatic and 90s extreme elements. Preposterous poses and outfits and scenarios, but despite them, I still can take the piece seriously enough. Its splashy, edgy artwork complements and enhances a well-told and intriguing story, rather than the story taking a back seat in favor of bombastic, glorified pinup pages. So much of the familiar imagery and trappings of Spawn that became my whole world for too long are here. A demonic creature of the night who finds himself caught in the middle of a supposed celestial war, with a fat slob of a demon using him for his own purposes, battling the ostensible good guys and represented by an angel with a flaming sword, who's drafted against his will, loses his identity and his freedom when he becomes the angel, murders anyone in his way without a thought, and is as dangerous and merciless as the avatar of evil he pursues. There's a repulsive and vulgar troll with beady red eyes that acts as a guide and wants his pupil to seek vengeance on pretty much everybody, as if Redeemer had his own version of clown. In fact, the whole thing reads like Spawn if Redeemer was the protagonist and had to deal with all the same crap Al Simmons did. And if Spawn, I guess, was Sam and Twitch. Our protagonist gets to be a creature of the night, do all that cool dramatic posturing in the shadows, and the character who does all the detective work and figures out things. Jean-Paul gets full-on amnesia like Simmons did once he becomes Azrael. He resists his calling and tries to refuse to be what his programming tells him he is, and he's stuck with and haunted by that calling no matter how desperate he is to rid himself of it. The alleged demon Biss is basically just Malbolgia with a little tremor thrown in for good measure, and his disciple, Laha, reminds me a little of Jason Wynn wearing a Dark Ages Spawn outfit, especially the way Wynn's potbelly was exaggerated when he was turned into Redeemer, not to mention little details like the heart monitor lines moving across a page to denote someone who's in danger and then, well, dead, and a guy who looks like a white chapel crossed with Cable from X-Force, who's responsible for Jean-Paul Valley's transformation into Redeemer. They're Azrael, not by murdering him and sending him to hell, but by killing Valley's father and activating his secret childhood conditioning, like if the costume was inside Al Simmons all along and it just came out when Chapel killed him. Or Jessica Priest, or whoever the heck it was. I've spent these last 2 years trying to condition myself to repress these memories, but they're all flooding back. This reads like what I might have expected Spawn to be before my year-long rude awakening, and boy is it a breath of fresh air. Dennis O'Neil, just a few months after Image started publishing Spawn, is writing something very close to what I think McFarlane thought he was creating. It's big, bombastic, ultra-violent, and ultra-stylized comic book melodrama that's trying to push the boundaries of brutality and adult subject matter in a mainstream superhero comic. And while Sword of Azrael certainly revels some in its violence, the blood and gore always serves the story. It utilizes all those contemporaneously popular ideas, the stuff kids are trying to get their hands on because it's brutal and unwholesome and their parents don't want them to see it, like demonic imagery and big frickin' guns, and still manages to retain some humanity and optimism. The moral of the story here is that human willpower can overcome anything, and no matter how hard someone tries to turn you into something you aren't, the human penchant for freedom and individuality is always there. Regardless of who you are and what you've done, you have a choice to be better, as opposed to all those uplifting lessons in Spawn comics like good and bad are pretty much the same thing, i.e. there's only gray, and God and the devil are just toddler brats throwing temper tantrums. So again, Dumas Vince Light, I ask you, reviewing this stuff is supposed to be a challenge. Why, again? The biggest difference between this celestial Batman tale and Spawn, of course, is that the supposedly supernatural beings Batman's investigating aren't supernatural at all. This globe-trotting adventure is relatively large in scope and takes us all the way to mountains of Switzerland, to the UK, and an exotic oil refinery in Texas, but it's also a relatively grounded story, all about a cult that creates the facade of the Celestial, but whose members are as mortal as Bruce Wayne. O'Neil establishes that right up front when Laha riddles our first Azrael, Jean-Paul's father, full of bullets, and manages to kill this presumed unkillable angel before we have any idea even what Azrael and his Order of St. Dumas are. For the sake of this miniseries as its own piece, I actually think it might have been more effective if Batman got wind of the legend of Azrael before we see that legend murdered, to give Batman a dose of his own medicine and make the reader question, however briefly, whether this flamboyant soldier of vengeance might be a supernatural force. On the other hand, Azrael is apparently good at covering his tracks, and part of his charge is to keep his existence a secret, which the Order of Dumas has managed to do since it broke off from the Knights Templar in the 16th century, naming itself after its less than pious leader, who Oracle says no one has ever accused of being a saint. So unless Jean-Paul Sr. totally sucks at his job, the only real way Batman should find out about him is how he does here, where he's killed in the middle of a parade and causes a panic. The Elder Valley drags himself to Jean-Paul's apartment, lucky it was so close, and reveals his bizarre, supposedly sacred charge to his typically counterculture and directionless college student son, telling him he'll have to take on the Azrael mantle. I like that Valley is usually hiding his full expression behind round, thick-lensed glasses, suggesting perhaps that he's uncertain and not a fully formed person yet. He's about to embark on a terrible journey of self-discovery, thrust into a manufactured destiny masquerading as providence, whereas metal and character will be challenged in the most extreme ways imaginable. He has no idea who he is, and he's about to be forced to choose as he discovers that he's been conditioned from childhood to be the angel of vengeance when his father can no longer live up to the task. Hardly a holy or valiant task, the Mantle of Azrael is about one thing: destroying the enemies of a thuggish elite cult that exists to preserve its own massive, privileged fortune of centuries past, under the pretense of serving a divine cause. Valley is trained by the otherworldly-looking Dumas, an inhuman dwarf who seems to be the only member of the Order that truly believes in it, to the detriment of his own humanity. He spends the entire miniseries telling Jean-Paul about all the great things Azrael does not do. The title of the second issue is Azrael Does Not Protect. He also doesn't rescue, he doesn't think, he doesn't sing karaoke, he doesn't carry his neighbor's groceries, and he does not, under any circumstance, do windows. Although he does crash through windows. A lot. I swear, Dumas says Azrael does not do this or that as often as the board calls stuff irrelevant. The one thing Azrael does do is horribly maim and skewer anyone that stands in the way of the Order of St. Dumas with a flaming sword, or at least that's what he's supposed to do. But Jean-Paul works really hard to work against his programming and be who he wants to be, and through this struggle, he begins to find himself, even as he loses even the memory of his own name. The amnesia angle works in this case, for the most part, because it's an adversity for Valley to overcome rather than a dramatic crutch for O'Neill to lean on, so he doesn't have to do the legwork to make his protagonist come alive as his own distinct person. He's not fully formed by the end, but that's the point. His hypnotized conditioning is designed to take his personality from him, to make him a living, thoughtless weapon to be aimed by the Order, and by the end, he's broken that conditioning enough, somewhat thanks to Alfred's guidance, to at least begin to redefine what Azrael is, and to begin to define who Jean-Paul Valley is. He follows Dumas around Switzerland and to the UK in an attempt to kill Laha, his father's murderer, a former member of the Order who has siphoned money from the Order, naturally they've got to be in Switzerland where they have all those handy, untraceable bank accounts, to fund his own illegal arms business. And by illegal arms, we're talking, again, Rob Liefeld level, overt kill, blow up the moon from Utah, ought to take 16 men to lift mega guns. And when I said grounded, I just mean we're not dealing with any actual magic. Laha gets in a helicopter crash and turns into a totally religious nutjob, deciding he's been called by Dumas' sworn enemy, the demon Biss, because everything's scarier with two eyes, to murder what's left of this 12-man and dropping order and steal all their cash. I don't know why we need this guy to lose his mind to get to that place. All he cares about is money in the first place, and if he's gonna go against the Order and he knows about Azrael, killing everyone involved with them seems like a logical step anyway. But O'Neill seems to want to really drive home this criticism against cultism, the kind of religious extremism that leads to holy wars, the notion that dangerous residue of that line of thinking is alive today, and that a zealot with a religious cause can justify any self-serving, heinous act with any on-the-fly interpretation of circumstance to fit his dogma. Batman, naturally, is also on Laha's trail thanks to some slick detective work after the panic at the festival that includes the classic Batman trope trifecta of Batman forensics, Batman disappearing on Gordon on the roof of GCPD in mid-sentence, and pouring through documents in a dark room with a flashlight in his mouth. Batman figures out that Dumas Central is in Switzerland, and he and Alfred instantly get shot down by Laha, the religious fanatic equivalent of Wile E. Coyote, as soon as they arrive. Bruce knows how to handle any survival situation and impresses Alfred with his incredible snowshoe-making abilities. Eventually, he finds himself going toe-to-toe with the newly minted Azrael in his first outing with his flaming sword and slimming costume. His conditioning is kicked in during his training with Dumas, and he's discovering all these abilities and information he didn't know he knew. In an exchange that's somehow not as dopey in print and in this context as it is when you say it out loud, he asks Dumas if he's a tough guy, but Dumas says he's not there yet. He's flabby and out of shape, and he needs to get physically toned. Except I guess he doesn't, because whenever he puts on the Azrael suit, it magically gives him a Batman-esque physique. Dumas isn't giving the outfit enough credit. The body armor might not have been strong enough to stop Laha's weapons from ripping up his father, but it sure makes his calf muscles ripped. Quesada showcases his ability to effectively weave panels together to create captivating cinematic action in this thrilling fight on top of a hovercraft, some of which is accomplished with no text whatsoever. Batman doesn't want to fight this mysterious angel wearing the garb of the man's murderer whom he's investigating, but Azrael forces his hand, and Azrael only gets the upper hand when they fight in the thick snow and Dumas hits Master Batman with the hovercraft. That's what Alfred calls him when he tries to warn him that Dumas is about to smash into him. Master Batman. Again, somehow sillier as I'm talking about it than it seemed when I was reading it. Bruce and Alfred find the Order's hideaway and rest up. For the most part, O'Neill nails their father-son partner dynamic, infusing it with some witty banter and a real sense of mutual admiration and respect. Much of the levity in the story comes from their exchanges, which are full of affection and sarcasm as they constantly keep each other on their toes. Alfred serves as a capable sidekick for Batman, functioning as his backup when things go awry as Robin might, but grounding him with his experience and level-headed thinking as a mentor and father figure. It's no accident that he's partnered with Alfred here instead of Robin, given the father-son theme inherent in Azrael's story. Having the right guidance and encouragement is paramount to coping with the loss of a parent and nurturing the extreme drive and determination Bruce develops and Valley has already programmed into him. But the scene in the shelter is the one place where O'Neill goes off the rails with Bruce and Alfred's banter, and it's one of the oddest exchanges I've ever read in a comic book. Alfred uses the resources at his disposal and makes Bruce a spinach fajita. Because they're in Switzerland, Batman says, "I would have expected chocolate." What? Bruce, you're world-traveled. You're up on virtually every culture there is, and you're stereotyping an entire region's cuisine down to the first food that comes to most people's head when they think of it. If chocolate even counts as a food. I suppose if you were in Idaho, you'd expect a potato fajita, or if you were in Hawaii, a pineapple fajita. It's the one place in this story he sounds like an ignorant Dumas. So then Alfred says a chocolate fajita would be barbarian. Sure, but let's stay on point here, Alfred. The dumber thing here is expecting a chocolate fajita. Then Batman starts going on about the Order's relay satellite, and I think we're done with the bizarre chocolate fajita bit, but nope, it picks up on the next page. Batman compliments Alfred on his fajita, but Alfred isn't convinced. He raises an eyebrow in a panel I want to take out of context and send to everyone I know, like the Thanos copter, and says, "It may have been a mistake. Perhaps chocolate could work." I don't know if Batman is just humoring him, or if they both have really different taste buds, or what exactly I'm supposed to take from this scene. But it plays as comic beats designed to interrupt exposition, and they are so baffling I'm distracted by it for the rest of the issue. Meanwhile, Nomaz plans to blow them up with a detonator switch that should trigger rigged explosives in case the place is penetrated by unclean hands, as Nomaz puts it. But one of the wires inside the shelter is frayed, and Bruce and Alfred survive by sheer dumb luck. O'Neill writes himself out of a few holes with convenient twists of fate like that, but they give him the opportunity to create examples of religious extremists interrupting any situation that doesn't go their way within the context of their beliefs. Nomaz says that Saint Dumas has turned his back on him and Valley in that moment. Yet whenever Valley survives an incredibly dangerous situation and is supposed to be surprised, Nomaz will tell him Dumas is protecting him, and regardless of the body armor he shouldn't need if he's protected by a holy spirit, and the fact that, as Valley points out later, Dumas sure didn't have his father's back when Laha painted several panels with his father's blood. Nomaz won't tolerate any questioning of the holy saint he serves, but Valley is more than skeptical and clearly thinks Nomaz is a bit of a Dumas. So both parties, the Dumas pair and the Batman pair, figure out what Laha is up to separately, and they try to chase him down before he kills any more of the Order. Laha goes after the weakest of the Order first, a decrepit and ill man in a hospital bed, and manages to take him out with one of his trademark big honkin' space guns before either Azrael or Batman can stop him. Man, this guy really has lost it. There are far easier ways to dispose of men dying in hospital beds. You don't need a laser bazooka. We learned this from Angel. All you need is a pillow. Jean-Paul gets shot trying to stop Laha. Alfred and Nomaz rescue him. Nomaz takes Alfred hostage at knife point, and Batman, in the commotion, gets drugged and captured by Laha. After halfway through, it becomes evident that the world Batman's found himself in is Azrael's and he is just living in it. As with Vengeance of Bane, Batman's iconography, his methods, and his principles serve to inform our protagonist, and contrasting Batman to what Azrael is and what Valley becomes highlights certain of his attributes and ideals. But it isn't really Batman's story. The latter two issues see Valley struggling against his conditioning when he's in the Azrael suit, which tells him to be a simple instrument of destruction and nothing more. And after Valley shows bravery and compassion by stepping in between Nomaz and Alfred, refusing to let Nomaz kill the butler when he thinks they have no use for him anymore, Alfred works overtime to continually remind the boy of his humanity and to help him turn Azrael into his own tool, rather than a tool for Nomaz and the quickly dwindling Order, which is dropping like flies as Laha Biz quickly sends them off to the next world. Batman kind of serves as the damsel in distress. He's not stripped of his abilities and resolve to make Azrael look like the stronger hero, but he's in a massive pickle he can't get out of on his own. Laha puts on the bat suit and perverts the symbol of Batman, using it to confuse and frighten people as Batman does, but for his own twisted and selfish ends, which serves as intriguing foreshadowing to Valley inheriting the mantle, a man who will put on the suit with good intentions, but ultimately will also end up perverting Bruce's legacy and what he intends for Batman to represent. That leads to the most horrifyingly striking panel in the story, an enormous and wild-eyed Laha smiling deviously as a demonic Batman. Bruce tries to use the demon bat idea against Laha, telling him he's traded one demon for another and that he's dishonoring his true master by wearing the garb of Bruce's. I like how we get to the core of Bruce's dichotomy with this scene, the good man who uses his dark side against evil. Laha questions the idea that Batman is also a demon, and Bruce's response couldn't be more perfect. Some would say I've been writing one since I was 8 years old. Bruce's plan backfires when Laha decides to kill him as a sacrifice in the hopes that Lord Bizquick will forgive him. Bruce holds his own for a minute, even tied to a pipe, but ultimately meets Azrael, who naturally arrives with Alfred and Dumas just in the nick of time, to rescue him from a fiery death. As the globe-trotting trio has remained a step behind Laha until this moment, Valley has been more and more consumed by Azrael whenever he puts on the suit, unnecessarily eviscerating opponents that hardly pose any threat to him. He says, "When I am him, I simply act." And this is the point we discover he's lost himself, to the point that he doesn't even remember his own name. But when the opportunity presents itself to rescue a man who doesn't deserve his fate, Valley manages to subvert Nomaz's orders and his conditioning, and he saves Bruce. In that moment, he remembers his name. He remembers his father, who shares the same name, and declares triumphantly, "I am not an angel, I am a man." And perhaps, surprisingly, that's it. No epilogue, no aftermath, no discussion from Bruce or Alfred about what they've taken away from all this, just a man told he has a horrible duty as an assassin for a psychotic cult given an opportunity to redefine what Azrael is, and he takes it. It's a complete story with a fully realized character arc, but it serves as an introduction for a grander narrative, for a character who isn't fully formed, a man who has decided what he won't be, but not who he is yet. The really fascinating thing about Jean-Paul Valley is that he goes through everything Bruce has in reverse before he gets the opportunity to define himself. First, he gets his conditioning and training, albeit without his knowledge and through hypnosis. Then, he loses his father, and rather than making a vow and developing his vigilante persona, his costume and his charge are handed to him like the keys to the family laundromat. Congratulations! You have to watch people put their delicates in a washing machine and play Pac-Man every day. It's been your family's legacy for generations, and you have no choice in the matter. Like Bruce, he has an almost sacred duty he can't break that comes about because of the loss of his parents. In Valley's case, just the one. But unlike Bruce, it's a charge that's forced on him by the person he's lost. He doesn't become Azrael because he wants to change the world. He's not even allowed to feel anything about his father's death, and he's not allowed to continue being himself. Like Bruce, he is Azrael because he puts on the costume and defines what that persona means with his actions. Batman is a protector of the innocent and a hunter of criminals because that's what Bruce chooses Batman is. Azrael is an angel of vengeance and an instrument of righteous onslaught because that's what the Order has brainwashed each man they've put in the costume to be. But if Jean-Paul can go against that brainwashing, Azrael becomes whatever he decides he is. And by the end, he's redesigned that identity to be something closer to Batman, simply by defying Nomaz and doing all the things he's told Azrael is not. I don't know if this is intended, but I like the name Valley, signifying an empty chasm of identity Jean-Paul has to traverse and fill up with personality and substance in his quest to be his own person. And there is not a more appealing message than that for teenagers in 1993. The parallels between Azrael and Batman's histories and the genesis of their willpower is fascinating, but the most interesting thing about Sword of Azrael to me is its relationship to Vengeance of Bane. They work as natural companion pieces, even though they weren't conceived of that way, and I think they're both essential preliminary pieces to Nightfall, now that I've read them both. Not only do they establish the principal players, but reading both inherently draws an ideological triangle between the three. Just 2 hours into this insane gauntlet I've been thrust into, and I already have deep and complex character studies for the man who will break the bat and the man who will take his mantle. And through those character pieces, I'm getting useful reminders and new insights into Batman psychology and philosophy. It's a crying shame Sword of Azrael isn't included in even the most recent trade releases of Nightfall, though it is, of course, in my unofficial Riddler knockoff approved amended edition. I hope DC finds out and sues the green pants off of you, sir. But also thanks, I'm glad I got to read it. The two stories serve similar functions, but are structured in entirely different manners. Sword of Azrael is the beginning of a coming-of-age story, about a kid we know little about, appropriately because there's not much to him yet. while Vengeance of Bane is a man's entire life story up until he goes to Gotham, a man who has totally defined himself with no one's help whatsoever, and knows exactly who he is and what he stands for. But it's still, ultimately, the start of a bigger story. Bane is defined by comparisons to Batman inherent to his history, partly through what the reader is expected to already know about the character, and through the apparently mystical properties of his customized brand of self-discipline, and he doesn't appear in that story until the very end. Azrael is defined by comparisons to Batman as we follow his part in Azrael's story. He's our eyes into a strange cultist tradition, and his presence enhances and informs what we're learning about the Order and Jean-Paul's role as a slave to it. Looking at the two as companion pieces, Batman becomes the midpoint between two extremes of discipline and conditioning. He's self-conditioned and self-reliant, like Bane, but he has mentors, and he allows other people to help guide and shape him and to develop his values. Valley has mentors as well, but besides Alfred, who he's influenced by through lucky happenstance, they force him into his discipline, and he's not supposed to think for himself. Bane needs no one, answers to no one, and seeks to dominate as the strongest and most worthy. Valley, before his declaration at the end anyway, serves a master who tells him what to wear, where to go, and who he is. Batman, though he can't always admit it, needs others, like Alfred, Gordon, and Oracle, to be his eyes, his backup, even his conscience. He is not his own moral authority, and there isn't one entity he answers to. He answers to a sense of justice, drawing a line he won't cross. And by working with Gordon, though he doesn't always work to the letter of the law, he answers to the law. Bane is completely selfish, and in a way, Azrael in his purest form is completely selfless. His cause isn't just, but he isn't out for himself. Batman is out for the greater good and himself. He fights because he's compelled by his own pain, constantly working for the 8-year-old kid who is still there in his bones. But unlike both Bane and Azrael, he has real compassion for other people. Obviously, Jean-Paul Valley isn't the same Azrael as his father was, and by the end of this story, his needle is moving closer to center. He's starting to look more like Batman, which is no doubt why Bruce will consider Valley to replace him when his back is broken. Though I am working on partial memory moving through these books, as I've never read all of the Nightfall comics, and it's been nearly a decade since I read O'Neill's prose novel, which is not his best work and, if memory serves, truncates too much of the narrative and leaves out some of the juicier stuff. Valley clearly does have a conscience, unlike Bane, but also, like Bane, has no master by the end of the story. I suppose most readers weren't aware of either of these books or their significance to the material when Nightfall began, and wouldn't have appreciated all the nuances present in the characterizations of these new characters in relation to Batman, their strength of will, and their respective motivations. And I'm glad to be armed with those observations as I get into comic books that feature Batman's name more prominently in the titles than these new characters. Sword of Azrael isn't the near masterpiece Vengeance of Bane is. O'Neill takes some narrative shortcuts, like jamming up Laha's Quake arena rifle toward the end just so Bruce can get the upper hand. There are a couple of odd instances of characters telling other characters stories for several pages to catch the reader up to speed when the person on the receiving end was there and already knows it all. In one case, when Laha explains how his helicopter crashed to a henchman, the man hilariously says, "Why do you tell me these things? I was there," as if O'Neill knows it's clunky exposition, but still can't think of a better way to get us that information. Although, he also offers another explanation when the newly crazy demon worshipper says, "Perhaps I am not speaking to you. Perhaps I direct my words to him," referring to Malbolgia of the mountains, who only Laha can see. Yeah, maybe he would do that, but the real reason it's there is a standard sloppy comic book flashback, which could have easily been given to us in chronological order. Why not just show it to us last issue before Bruce gets there? Is it important that we don't know Laha is there before he shoots down Bruce's helicopter? I don't think that surprise is worth it. I have a lot of respect for the lack of third-person narration, though, explaining everything we're seeing, so the pictures are allowed to communicate most of the story that organic dialogue can't. But it starts to feel like it needs it in places where the comic is struggling to communicate events to the reader. I also found the constant dashes, chopping up dialogue between panels, to be excessive and intrusive. A good number of lines happen across panels and even pages, and not just for dramatic effect. It's normal practice to see a transition over a line of dialogue from one panel to another to connect scenes with a single idea. But here, it's like O'Neill and Quesada are so concerned about big chunks of dialogue overtaking the art, they just stagger sentence fragments across a page, and it really breaks up the rhythm of conversation. Finally, Sometimes scenes bleed right into other scenes on the same page with no transition or indication that we're in a new location or with new characters, and that can be momentarily confusing. I understand the need to use the real estate you have. There's a lot going on in these 4 issues, and the story may not have the page count it needs to include everything if it has to devote every page to a single scene. But I'd have appreciated natural segues, and it's the only thing that ever makes the piece feel limited by the medium it's in. I'm so excited about actually caring about a protagonist who's thrust into a destiny he doesn't want, has his identity stripped from him, gets amnesia, and impulsively murders people. See, Todd, as my writing mentor said in college, who was neither a butler nor a troll with LED eyes, you can make anything work, you just have to make it work. And son of a Batman, at this rate, I have no idea how I'm going to keep my collection intact by the end of these 2 days. I already need a bat nap, and I'm just getting started. At least I have a fridge full of Mountain Dews, and I don't have to worry about falling into a sugar coma when I drink one. I fought that craving like it was Bane trying to bend me over its knee for so long during Spawn Year. Now it might be the only thing that gets me through this nightmare. And I take it all back. It is a nightmare. The problem with the material actually being good is I've got too much to say. But Batcap does not give up. Batcap does not complain. Batcap does not get burnout. Batcap reviews. Batcap reviews until it kills him. Signed, Captain Logan.